So good morning, and many of you know I just came back from a trip. I got in late last night from Mexico, so it was a trip that was really wonderful in many ways, but travel is not something that I look forward to. I usually don't regret it after, but I don't look forward to it. So I invite you to think about a trip you recently took. Maybe you often travel. Maybe you hardly ever leave home, so you may have to reach back in your mind to think of a trip. But how did you feel about the trip before you went, if you can imagine? Were you excited? Were you caught up in preparation and details? And then were you able to be present when you were there on your trip? I think sometimes that's very difficult. Think about the sights and sounds you experience, whatever trip you're thinking about now. What did it mean to you, and how did it impact you after you returned home? So if I breathe in, I can picture, again, being at the Pacific Ocean, which for me is just like a home of kind. But if you are like me, you also might have some anxiety along the way when you travel. You might ask yourself some questions like, what if this happens when I'm on my trip? I thought to myself as I was driving to Florida, what if there's going to be a lot of traffic and I'm going to be late to dinner with my dad? Or what if on the flight there's a lot of turbulence and everyone's really nervous? Or what if it's raining while I drive? What if it all happens? And so some of us like to be very prepared. Maybe we allow extra time and we line up the whole maps, and I usually have Waze and maps and maybe one other one going whenever I drive down to Florida from here. So we do all these things to prepare. And I usually figure out that, you make it through okay, regardless of whether or not you're prepared. And I've learned that this whole thing about what if this happens or what if that happens can have a different connotation. It could be, what if I just stopped worrying about the trip and just enjoyed each moment of it? What if I just accepted whatever happened along the way as it happened? What if I remained present through surprises, twists in the road, unexpected encounters, moments of joy and moments of sorrow? What if? And as Jesus rides into Jerusalem this morning on a donkey or a colt, I can't help wondering how he felt. Was he afraid? Was he exhausted? Was he excited? Curious about what happened next? Did he have what ifs in his mind? What if he is hailed as a king and the crowd turns on him? What if he is tried and executed this week? Or what if he could take this journey and go home unharmed? What if? Will you pray with me, please? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So we finally arrived at Palm Sunday after our long sojourn through Lent, a journey in the wilderness that was meant to bring us closer to Jesus, and I hope it did that for each one of you. And now we are riding with him into Jerusalem, into the heart of Holy Week, into the story of his passion and death. Many of us are looking forward to celebrating Easter. But this morning, I invite you to stay where we are on this journey, to wave palms with the crowd and celebrate the coming of the King. And like any traveler on a trip, just pretend for one moment that we don't know what's going to happen next. Yet we know from the Gospels that Jesus did know what was going to happen next. He knew what his fate would be. He was riding into tragedy, into death, and then finally into resurrection. Anglican priest Harry Williams talks about how Jesus was left entirely alone at some points on this journey of Holy Week. Perhaps with dread and horror, perhaps with despair and panic inside. Yet he continued on. The waving palms, the cheering crowd as he rode into Jerusalem was just the beginning. And the fanfare could not erase the fact that this was a journey ending in death. The knowledge that the crowd who waved the palms and shouted, "Hosanna," could easily turn into those who would chant, "Crucify him, crucify him." Yet Jesus continues on, a journey towards sacrifice, a journey made from love. I listened to another story of someone who took a perilous journey this past week, and I think we're going to hear more about someone else's journey who's in this room. Hello, Giovanni, this morning. But I want to share with you a story that I heard on my trip, and this was the story of Susie, who walked from the Nayarit region of Mexico to the United States. Walked. 19 years old, pregnant, and bringing nothing but herself. She faced many perils along the way. Heat, hunger, menaces of all kinds. My Spanish isn't too good. I think everyone knows that. So I think she said she rode a train into the country. I think that's possible. She made it across the border, and she found work in Orlando, Florida, and lived there, giving birth to her son and sending money back to her family every month for 5 years until she was found out by immigration and she was sent back to Mexico. I told her I was going to tell the congregation her story. She was very surprised. But she told me she preferred living in Mexico with her family around her in her own culture. And when she got back to Mexico, she met someone and married and gave birth to a second son. So I wondered, what did you do it for? What was the trip all about? And she said she did it for her firstborn son. She did it because she was pregnant. She did it so he could be born in America and be a US citizen, so he could have a better life. And today he lives in Oregon. So how many people take this journey every day? A journey of love and sacrifice. A journey full of peril. A journey done for love through every treacherous step. Susie told me she's not particularly religious. She was raised Catholic, but that didn't mean too much to her. Yet she sacrificed herself and risked her life without a second thought. And this, I believe, is where God lives. God lives in these walks, these journeys, when we're willing to take those steps in action. This is the journey of love that shows our love for one another. Not what we say we believe, but how in large and small ways we act. Greater love has no man than he lays down his life for a friend. Jesus rode on into Jerusalem. And this procession of the palms is described in all the Gospels. Yet in this Gospel of John that Sherry read this morning, we have one particular phrase that does not occur in the other versions. Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Not rejoice, daughter of Zion, but do not be afraid. The words echo Zechariah, but there's a shift there. And I want you to think about this for yourself. Which is the better advice? Do not be afraid or rejoice, daughter of Zion. What message do you need to hear this morning? Maybe it's both rejoice and do not be afraid. No matter what happens on your journey, no matter what perils you face, rejoice and do not fear, for your King comes to you. God's very presence travels with you. And throughout life's many changes, and we've all been through them, there is one truth that I know for certain, and that is wherever we go, God goes with us. I don't think anyone really knows how Jesus felt as he rode into Jerusalem. We can only imagine. Every year, Palm Sunday comes. We know what is about to happen. Yet we are called to pause in this moment of celebration. And in this moment of celebration, we can imagine that love is riding towards us, carving a path into our hearts, bringing us this message again and again. Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. I am with you always. This morning's gospel tells us the disciples did not understand at first. They did not understand. But later they did. Let us continue with the story. I'd like to invite our actors up, please.
Now, the chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many gave false testimony against him, and their testimony did not agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, saying, We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands. But even on this point, their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus,
Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?
But he was silent and did not answer. Again, the high priest asked him,
Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?
I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven.
Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?
all of them condemned him as deserving death. Some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, to strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." The guards also took him over and beat him. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him,
Are you the king of the Jews?
You say so.
Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again,
Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you.
but Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the festival, he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man named Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them,
Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?
for he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again.
Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call the king of the Jews?
Crucify him.
Why? What evil has he done?
But they shouted all the more, Crucify him. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified.